Okay, well, you know what? I think we should make a start now because we're just after 12 o'clock. Awesome. Well, my name's Annette, and thank you for coming to today's webinar, Finding, Recruiting and Keeping the Right Staff. Today's webinar is powered by HRD and supported by enableHR, and both are companies within FCB. Together, we help businesses navigate around Australia and New Zealand's complex employment laws by providing a range of services and products to ensure businesses are compliant. Okay, so before we get into it, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about our brands and what we do. So if you're not familiar with enableHR, enableHR is a cloud-based human resources information system, and the software stores and manages all of your employee files securely in the cloud. And you can access hundreds of legal documents and templates created by our workplace experts. And the workflows and checklists inside of enableHR protect your business by stopping you from accidentally doing something illegal when following a sensitive HR process, such as managing a difficult employee. HRD is the outsourced HR service and helps you build a smarter business. HRD clients have access to our award-winning services, including our 24/7 telephone advisory service, comprehensive HR audit, WHS audit, HR software, WHS management software, insurance and representation, and a library of legal resources. Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to our presenter, Catherine. Hi, Catherine.
Hello, hi Annette.
Welcome, and thank you for presenting today. I wanted to tell you about Catherine. Catherine is a passionate senior workplace relations consultant at FCB and HRD. And Catherine provides an in-depth advice on a range of employment relations matters with a particular interest in the employee lifecycle. So thank you again, Catherine. I'm going to let you take the reins now.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Annette. And thank you everyone for being here and joining the webinar. Yes, I am Catherine, and today we'll be going through how to find the right staff for your company, how to recruit the right staff, and how to hold on to and retain those good ones. So we'll go into quite a bit of depth about it. And if you do have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll endeavour to get to people's questions at the end of the presentation. So we'll start off with finding the right people. So we're going to go through things to consider when you're preparing a job advertisement or perhaps a job description, and how to attract the type of candidates that you want, as well as what the company's obligations are and what employee themselves, what their obligations are when they're going through that, that recruitment and that hiring process. So we'll also go through recruitment strategies to make the recruitment process itself more concise and a bit more organised. And we'll also talk about how to manage those unsuccessful candidates. And then finally, we'll go through these strategies and approaches that you may want to take to ensure you are retaining your good staff. So we'll start off with the first topic. Thanks, Annette. And we'll go through some initial considerations. So with recruitment at the moment, we obviously have to consider the changing labour market that's occurred, of course, because of COVID-19. So a lot of employers have had to turn to like domestic staff and domestic resources, where typically they may have looked overseas for skilled labour, and finding particular staff within the industry with a particular set of skills. It's become a bit of an issue since COVID-19. So I guess what you really need to ask yourself is, can you amend a typical role, or can you amend your recruitment strategy itself to try dipping into these markets that we have more of a hold over at the moment? Some points to consider, next slide, thank you, Annette. Some points to consider when you are drafting a job description to try and attract the right staff are some 3 simple questions that'll get you started. So who do you want? What type of people do you want applying for this? What type of experience would you like them to have, etc.? What do you want them to do? So what do you want their role within your company to be? And how do you want them to do it? So once you've answered these questions, you really are laying the foundations for your job description and allowing you to commence that recruitment process. So with the job description, the central piece really is the title. So you want to make sure you have an effective title, and it should really accurately reflect the job and also allude to the duties that will be performed. So you're not going to attract candidates with a non-specific job description title, such as, social media person or something or other, when what you're really actually looking for is, let's say, a marketing coordinator. The job description itself should be free of any factors that could be seen as bias or discriminatory. That could be stuff about, age or gender, but we'll go into that a little bit further and a little bit deeper later on. You'll also need to consider the type of engagement you're looking for. So, full-time, part-time, or casual, or maybe you're even recruiting for an independent contractor to operate under their own ABN or ACM. Need to consider whether there's flexibility in the role that you're recruiting for. And if there is, you should really let candidates know, because flexibility is often really desirable, and it may increase your pool of worthy candidates if they can see that this role has a flexibility element to it. You should also include KPIs, so your key performance indicators. This not only allows the candidate to know exactly what they're going to be required to perform at work, but it also allows, or it provides, I guess, an objective standard that their performance will be assessed against once they actually are employed. And it also gives you that opportunity to performance manage based on those KPIs in future if it's needed. We should really remember, though, with the job description, it's not a like an operative manual or anything like that. So you should keep the duties and the responsibilities list quite short and really just contain action, objective, purpose for each inherent requirement of that role, and not necessarily sit there and list, every single thing. Qualifications and experience. So you should really establish key criteria that a person within the role will be required to perform to the fullest potential. And that can be broken down into 3 levels, really. So qualifications, technical skills, and then also your soft skills. So qualifications obviously are something that the role can't be performed without. So if you're requiring someone to have perhaps a certain university degree or an industry certification or some type of professional registration, we need to make sure that we're saying that really clearly in the job description. And if it's rather a desirable rather than a requirement, we need to explicitly state that as well. Technical skills can be included. So for example, you can put something in there that says successful candidate will have proficiency in Excel or Microsoft Word or whatever program it is. And then those soft skills that you may want to include are any additional characteristics that you'd like the candidate to have, such as, good communication skills, team player, flexible, proactive attitude, things like that. I'd be more inclined to say that it's more beneficial to include more technical skills compared to those soft skills, because if the candidate is hired, like I mentioned before, and if they need to be performance managed, you must be able to compare their current performance objectives against something. And it's much easier to do so when we have actual technical skills in there rather than soft skills, which are quite subjective, obviously. You should sell the role. Don't just sell the role, sell the company as well. It's really easy, I've found, to focus exclusively on the role itself, but it's really, really important to show why your company is more attractive than others. So obviously in our professional modern world, positive workplace culture and work-life balance is a must, and it's really important to consider in that job description and that job advertisement how your company is perhaps fostering a positive workplace culture and a work-life balance, and they are an employer of choice, and you should really include this in the job description. What you should avoid in the job description. So really avoid internal terminology. So the company or the team itself may be fluent in the language that you guys use on a daily basis, but a potential candidate may not be. So refrain from using internal terminology and stick to well-known terminology or just plain English. Avoid discriminatory language. So look, It's an unconscious bias, and although it's frequently inadvertent, it's something that can often appear in a job description without us realizing it. So we really want to promote and create a diverse workplace, and therefore we should really be avoiding gendered or age-specific terminology to avoid limiting the reach of your job advertisement with those candidates. We should avoid being unrealistic. So give a really accurate representation of the role. It's fundamental that we are ensuring that we're attracting the right candidates so that, once again, you can manage performance when the employee comes on against those objective standards. And we're not requiring them or asking them to do something that they don't understand or they didn't anticipate would be a requirement of them in the role. Avoid negativity, of course. So for example, you often see in job descriptions things like, you won't be considered with less than 10 years of experience. This can come across as kind of hostile, and it might scare some candidates into not applying, even if they do possess those necessary skills. So for example, instead of saying you won't be considered unless blah, 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 we can write something like seeking a senior level employee with 10 years experience, preferable but not essential. Other negative language, it could be something like this role requires additional overtime due to the demanding nature. And we can just flip that and change it to something like, the role requires hard work and perseverance in a high performing team. And just by changing the language there, you've almost essentially said the exact same thing, but you've just changed the manner in which it's phrased. Really avoid being mysterious. So we don't want to leave candidates asking questions because we don't want to limit the candidate pool that we're getting. So we should give them an understanding of what their future at the company will look like rather than leaving it open to interpretation, essentially. In relation to the job description, it may seem that everything I've just listed, it's a lot of time going into something that could be so short and so simple, but it's really important to remember that the more accurate our job description is, the more you and the company itself will benefit in the long term. And you always should remember that once the job description's been written or it's been completed, it's not set in stone. So you can regularly go back and review it, develop it to accurately reflect what the day-to-day nature of the role is and what the needs of the business are. Our employees are obviously the heart of the business or the company itself. So setting goals and objectives for them from the get-go will ensure that we've got better performance objectives, everything is clear, and we're making sure that if we have a well-written and effective job description, we're attracting the right people. So where to find our quality candidates. So we've got internal and external resources. So not all companies have a dedicated HR resource, but if you do that, that's fantastic, that's great. And if you don't, you may potentially be struggling and it may be worth reaching out to, a recruitment company or a labour hire company or something or other to assist you with that, because they will often have a much larger pool of candidates. It may even be worth looking into an employee referral program where your current employees refer potential candidates or potential new employees. And more often than not, you will find that your employees themselves aren't going to want to refer poor quality staff. And of course, you can always pop your ads on online job platforms such as Seek, LinkedIn even, all that kind of stuff. So we'll move on to the recruiting element. And firstly, we'll go through employer obligations in relation to recruitment. So whilst the recruitment process itself isn't necessarily a heavily legislated area, there are particular things in existence that we should consider as a minimum legal requirement before we commence that onboarding process and give that offer to the candidate. So with candidates, if they're not from Australia, it's integral that we ensure that they have working rights. If they're on a visa, some visas, for example, like a working holiday visa or a student visa, will have specific requirements on when and how many hours you can engage the employee for. So if we're bringing someone on, it's really important you understand what the limitations are so that we're not opening the company up to any element of risk by going against, visa requirements or whatever it is. We need to understand anti-discrimination and adverse action legislation. And this one is really, really important. So there's this common misconception that adverse action legislation, which is within the general protections legislation, only applies once an employee has actually commenced employment, but that's not the case. If we have a candidate and they're, inquiring about the role, they're asking about the contract terms, asking about their pay or other areas in relation to their employment, this may be them exercising a workplace right. They have the right to inquire about those sorts of things. And where we don't offer employment to that candidate for the reason that they were coming to us and asking these kinds of questions, they were asking me about the pay too much and that bothered me. They were asking me about the hours of work and now I don't think I want to hire them. It could be considered adverse action where an employee is experiencing a kind of detriment or something for exercising those workplace rights and asking those types of questions. And then that could obviously open up the company to quite a risk under a general protections claim, even when that candidate hasn't actually started commencement with the company. So that's a really important one to keep in mind. I mean, that's not to say you can't say no to people or you can't say no to particular requests during the recruitment process. If an employee is coming to you and a candidate is coming to you and asking for a higher salary, but the salary you've already offered you think meets the requirements, then you can simply advise that, look, unfortunately, we're not in a position to offer an alternative and it's a matter for the candidate either to accept or decline the role on that basis. Similarly, with adverse action, it'll also apply when an employee discloses that they may have a particular medical condition, which could be defined as a disability under the disability discrimination legislation. So it's quite often that companies will do like a pre-employment questionnaire that will ask them to input if they have any, illness or injury or disability or anything like that that may prohibit them from performing the inherent requirements of the role. And this is usually done where there's a particular level of physical activity within a role. So for example, we see it quite often with, disability support work or trades work, things like that, where there's quite that physical element to the job. And if we are giving that pre-employment questionnaire and an employee does disclose an injury and the company does believe that that injury is going to actually genuinely impact the person's ability to perform the role, the discrimination risk can be managed through something like a pre-employment medical check or a capability review. We can mitigate that risk and manage that risk. We just have to make sure that we're following the appropriate processes to get to that point. So if we go through that and a doctor then certifies that the employee won't be able to perform the inherent requirements of the role because of the illness or the disability or whatever it is, it may not be considered adverse action if you don't offer them the role on the basis that you've got medical advice that they're actually unable to fulfill it. There's also some privacy considerations to take into account. So where you're gathering information in relation to employees and potential employees, you have to think about how you're going to store that information and what happens to that information when the candidate is unsuccessful. Where does it go? The very last thing in terms of employer obligations would be your pre-employment checks. So making sure that you're calling any of your candidates' references that they've provided to verify their employment history. And also, are there any kinds of like tickets or anything like that that they may need for work, such as, working with children's check, police check, white card, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that they have up-to-date licenses, could be like, a forklift license or something or other. Because the last thing we want is obviously to bring someone on thinking that they have that license or that specific check, but they don't. And then it delays their ability to perform some elements of the role, or even worse, it could result in, an accident or a workplace incident, which we obviously don't want. On the flip side, there are obligations on actual employees themselves, which to be honest are relatively similar. So in terms of like the checks and the visa conditions, they do need to disclose any and all factors that may impact their working rights. They need to disclose if they have, current notice periods with a current employer, which will impact the ability for them to start working with the company at a particular time. And if they've got like an expired license or an expired ticket or whatever, they have to make sure that that is up to date for the commencement of their employment with you. There's often protections for employers on this point with the employee obligations. If you have an employment contract in place, which it's not a legal requirement, but we always advise that employment contracts 100% put them in place for all of your staff. It's really important because contracts will often include like a warranties section that says, you know, an employee warrants that they have working rights and they're going to comply with the basic conditions. They warrant they hold all necessary licenses to perform the inherent requirements of the role. And so when someone starts, they've signed that contract, they've warranted all that. And if they don't actually have those necessary licenses or those checks that are required, it'll be a much easier avenue for the company if you've got that kind of clause within the contract in place to rely on to go back and end employment because the employee obviously hasn't complied with those obligations from the outset. Thanks, Annette. Another thing we should think about is recruitment strategy. So you may want to look at implementing a recruitment policy, which can be really useful by providing like a uniform process for the entire company so that every internal stakeholder is aware of what that process looks like and what is required for it. Another thing to consider is a strategy or a timeline for each of those individual processes. So naturally, you know, when you're going to market for a particular role, you have a kind of idea or a desired outcome on when they're likely to commence. And there's a number of steps that one person or multiple people within an organization will go through and will be required to do in order to get that person on board and ready to go on that date. So it's definitely worth putting together a proper timeline and a strategy of how you're going to go from kind of identifying a gap in your skill, which has led to a gap in your workforce, to then having someone actually begin that's going to start to fill that gap. The last thing we should consider is unsuccessful candidates who may be stressed, upset. So where a candidate is unsuccessful, it's really important that we are advising them of that in a timely manner. So, you know, the worst is having to sit there when you're waiting to find out whether you've gotten a role or a job or something, and it drags out for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then you know you're not going to be successful through that process anyway. So you should really reach out to candidates and let them know as soon as you possibly can. And again, we talked about it a little bit before, but just your privacy considerations. So make sure that if you are going to keep any information from those candidates, those people that you've interviewed, that you're storing them in a particular way so that the information itself isn't open and it's not accessible to anyone else in the company that's not meant to actually see it. And it may be a good idea to keep a candidate pool as well. So keep your candidates warm, you know, give them a call and say, hey, I'm so sorry you've been unsuccessful on this occasion, but you might want to connect with them on LinkedIn, or you may touch base with them regularly and send out letters or newsletters, whatever it is, to keep them interested. Because you might have a good candidate that didn't make the cut for that particular role, but it could be someone that you definitely want to speak with and potentially engage with further in the future. The final thing we're going to talk about is keeping employees. So you've gone to market, you found your staff, you've onboarded them. Now, how do we keep them? I think in general, there's many things that we have to consider and many things that do contribute to a business's success and their retainment of good employees. And I think that a business's success can almost be directly linked to retaining good employees. So there used to be a time when employees would often stay with the same company for most of their working life, and employers wouldn't really have to think about retaining them or worry about them leaving. And although, look, it does still happen, it just doesn't happen quite as often. So times have changed. And I think that's a result of, you know, today's fast-paced working environment. So now more than ever, it's really important to make sure that you're holding on to and you're retaining those really good employees. Making an effort to retain your employees who might otherwise be lost can add a lot of value to a business in terms of, improved performance, labor productivity, and your business should have some effective employee retention strategies in place before it becomes an issue rather than after the fact or during. I think that skilled workers can often be in short supply, especially at the moment. And research into employee turnover has generally highlighted that there's a need for companies to make a concerted and creative effort to keep top employees employed for as long as possible. And really, taking a strategic approach to retention gives you the best chance of developing a stable and loyal workforce so that the company can instead focus on, hitting targets rather than recruiting all the time. And on the same note, a company that's consistently hitting targets is obviously attractive to skilled workers. So, it's a nice little circle you've got. Whilst you may have some great strategic approaches to retention, the fact of the matter is that sometimes employees just leave, due to other factors that are beyond our control. So it could be things like family reasons. They may be needing to relocate. They may want to be furthering their career somewhere else, or they may just want a total and complete change in career direction. And that's obviously things that we just can't control. Other reasons that we can control, though, could be, for example, company culture. So they may feel like they're overworked or underappreciated or both. There may be relationship breakdowns between employees and their managers. And I think that's a really, really key one. So the employees themselves, they might see that there's no opportunity for growth or there's no opportunity for development within their role, or they may simply just feel that they're not being valued and they're not being heard within the company. I think there are many direct and indirect costs of unplanned employee turnovers, which can include the things like, the cost of hiring new employees. So there's obviously a cost associated with that because we've got, your advertising, you've got your actual interviewing, screening, hiring, the cost of onboarding, any potential training that may be needed, but also the time and effort that management spends in onboarding particular individuals. There's a lot of lost productivity when employees aren't retained. So it may take an employee between 6 and 18 months to reach the productivity of an existing person that they're there to replace. So it's really important that if we're putting all that effort in the short term, that you're retaining that person beyond that time. Lost engagement is another one. So other employees who see higher turnover are going to tend to disengage and lose productivity themselves. So there might be customer service issues and errors that may arise when an employee, takes longer to solve a particular problem than one who's been there for a longer time. Then that can cause issues with your customer base. There's also that training cost that would include internal training, or you might have to send them to an external provider to do additional training. But there's also just that massive cultural impact there. So I really think that when someone leaves in an organization, others do take the time to sit there and ask themselves why has that person left? And I believe that the average cost to replace an employee is between 30 to 200% of that person's annual salary. So by making efforts to retain your staff, you're greatly reducing cost amongst, a bunch of other things. Thanks, Annette. So there's obviously benefits of retaining your really good staff. And by retaining these staff, you're hopefully going to reduce your costs by avoiding that recruitment process, advertising, interviewing, checking references, all the time that comes with all of that. But you're also going to increase your business performance by reducing the downline downtime while your employees reach their full performance potential, as well as kind of reducing the stress of the remaining workers who are there to pick up the slack. It'll raise the profile of the business as a quality work environment where people might like to stay, and ultimately it's going to increase your workplace confidence, both with internal stakeholders and external. We'll really cover those key areas so you can help keep employee engagement high and hopefully prevent your employees from leaving the business and seeking employment elsewhere that might suit themselves. So There's some real strategies for retaining staff, which are going to go into quite a bit of detail here. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware or have heard of it, but there's currently an anti-work movement going on where large groups of people are coming together. And, it's here, it's America, it's overseas, everywhere. And they're coming together and they're quitting their jobs and they're, rallying for change in the workplace. So they're meeting up, they're rallying for higher rates of pay, more respect from their employers, and just ultimately they're really rallying against toxicity in the workplace. So I think now more than ever, with this movement kind of catching on and getting a voice in social media and things like that, retention strategies and creating a positive environment is really, really important. So the first one we're going to go through is a good onboarding and good induction experience. So a really positive onboarding and induction experience is really key to helping retain your staff. Obviously, if you're not creating a positive experience, it can reflect badly on the business and it can give the employee an extremely poor first impression of how the business operates and the value that the business is potentially putting on its existing but also its new employees. So it's really important to make sure that the onboarding and the induction process is structured and it's complying with, best practice, employment law legislation, all of that good stuff, and that it includes an interactive and thorough introduction and induction experience for the employee. So the induction process, it may include stuff like providing the employee with an overview of the company and the company's history. It may be an explanation of company benefits that may be provided, key contacts for particular things within the business so that the employee knows from the get-go where they're going if they're unsure of something. You may introduce your employee to all the people so that they can see who is around and see who they can go to for further guidance and support where needed. And this is an important one, not simply just taking that new employee around to the team that they're going to be working with regularly or just, their manager, whatever it is. It's really important to make sure that they're meeting, a vast majority of the workplace. Obviously, if it's a massive workplace, it's a bit different, but the more the merrier, essentially. We need to make sure that we're going through like a really thorough health and safety induction. You may even look at implementing like a buddy system or something, particularly where the organization is quite large. So you're really allowing them to get a good start, develop their on-the-job skills and understanding of the company itself and how it runs. Positive company culture. So that's really important, obviously. Look, workplace culture is one of those terms that you hear spoken in professional environments all the time, but I think we need to, companies really need to sit down and ask themselves the question, what does company culture mean for us? It's really tricky to define, obviously, because it can mean so many different things to different people, and it's obviously a difficult concept to measure. But essentially what I see culture being is a organization's character and personality. So what makes your workplace? What makes it unique? And some of the key elements that might influence your culture could be traditions, for example, or behaviors, values, attitudes, even expectations of all staff as a baseline of them being an employee of your company. So all of those elements are, universally important in cultivating a workplace culture that will really encourage staff to be their best and drive your company's ability to achieve its goals as well. So your organizational structure can really increase employee activity and engagement, and it can even strengthen the brand reputation as well. So it's not only there, and it's not only important for strengthening employee activity and engagement, but it strengthens the brand. It looks great to outsiders looking in. It's not always about, what's happening internally. It's about how others might view the company as well. Another strategy for retaining is considering employee benefits. And I do think that employee benefits are probably the most effective retainment strategy. It's really great to offer a range of different initiatives and benefits though, so that individuals are able to choose what they'd like to participate in, and it's not really just a one size fits all approach, everyone gets this or everyone gets that, because it doesn't always have the same appeal to some people as it does to others. So some employees will really be driven by, monetary benefits and promotional opportunities, commission, bonus structures, whatever that is, while other employees may be more motivated by developing their skills or learning new ones. Having flexible work arrangements that allow for a better work-life balance. So for example, being able to attend family functions, or employees that have school-age children, they may want to attend those school activities. Or you may even consider job sharing, or like a working from home type arrangement, so that you can really show that you have a vested interest in your employees. And that can obviously lead to long-term loyalty to your company. Offering a variety of benefits can really create a positive work environment. And obviously, you'll know your employees better than I do. And you'll know what they want, and you'll know what is needed to extend them further and focus their talents in order for the business to really succeed. As we said before, while pay rises and performance bonuses are usually the most traditional way to retain your staff, and it's the most usual strategy, there are other tools that you can include, or you may want to include in this. So things like additional leave benefits, paid parental leave, an extra 2 mental health days per year, something like that, free flu vaccinations. You could even do something as small as, free coffee, tea, milk in the lunchrooms, free fruit basket, social clubs or activities that people can participate in to help boost morale, book clubs and stuff I've seen. But the key takeaway here is that it's really important to offer a mix of things and a mix of recognition, development, and probing programs that can give the employee the opportunity to choose the benefit that suits them or appeals to them best. Not only is that going to help with commitment and job satisfaction, but it's really going to help with decreased absenteeism, which is obviously an issue that employers are facing, regularly. The steps that you're taking to build an effective employee engagement and retention strategy can help solidify your team's motivation and their loyalty, and it can really help build a really sought after working environment, which can give you a winning edge over your competitors, especially where you're fighting to keep a particular talent and making sure that you're not losing those really skilled workers. Planning in relation to the retention strategies should really start before you're hiring those new employees. So you understand what the business needs, what you're looking for in a candidate, how that person might fit into your existing team structure and business culture. But you may also look at things like, competitive remuneration, which is a really popular one, obviously. It's important to keep in mind that the job market is obviously continually changing always, but in response to economic and industry specific factors, especially now with COVID and vaccinations and all this kind of thing. So it's a really good idea to reevaluate salaries. At least annually. Fair Work does a wage decision at the 1st of July pretty much every year. It's been staggered over the past couple of years because of COVID, but I always say to clients that doing a salary review, near that financial year end is just, it's a great time to get on top of it and to offer your staff something that may keep them happy. With the salary reviews, you can go and look at, the latest industry trend report, salary guides, or even government statistics if you want to. And by offering more than the average salary bracket, you can really attract the highest quality and the most experienced people. When you're paying staff lower than the market, you're not necessarily getting the true value that you want in that particular role. Another thing to consider is training and development opportunities and the career pathways. So it's a real combination of training and development and coaching, and that's a really effective way to grow employee performance. So training is more so focused on the process of getting the skills required for a certain job, whereas development, on the other hand, puts more emphasis on the broader skills which apply to a wider range of situations in the workplace. So that could be things like decision making, thinking creatively, or even when you've got like an individual who doesn't have management experience, you may want to further develop them in order for them to have those skills and allow them to take on a more management type role. You should really be providing encouragement and support and valued feedback, along with learning opportunities for staff in a particular area. So for retention purposes, employees are really wanting to know what's happening with their future within the company. If they haven't got a clear pathway, it's really difficult for employees to envisage their future with the company, and it can result in, disengagement, lack of motivation, absenteeism almost. And it's really important to regularly engage your employees through something like a performance review or regular meetings to understand that they know what direction their career is heading in within your business. Performance management is another one. So using performance management reviews can help retain your employees, because it obviously relates to the feedback and the development, which we've discussed. So give your employees feedback on their performance, not only when it's poor, but also when they're doing well, even if it's just a quick, hey, I saw that thing you did yesterday, good job, or just an email back saying, thanks so much for this, really appreciate it. Even something as small as that. And I think the latest strategy that I think that companies should offer are real reward and real recognition strategies. So we need to understand that employees need a range of measures to assist them in strengthening their morale and loyalty to the company. And the company themselves should really invest in showing that their employees are valued and cared for at work. So you can implement something like a reward employee recognitions program, where you send out, something as small as just a company-wide email, or just mention someone's really good work in a team catch-up or a stand-up in the morning, whatever it is. But in conclusion, I think that by having a really clear and focused retention strategy in place for your business, and by introducing some of the ideas that I've discussed today, you'll be in a really good position to retain your really good employees and attract those skilled employees to your workplace as well.
Alrighty, so if you do have a question, please pop it in the Q&A now. We'll just wait for some more questions to come through, but there is one in here for you, Catherine. What is the difference between soft skills and technical skills?
Yeah, okay. So soft skills are more of your subjective skills. So stuff that is, you can't really measure it. It's just someone's interpretation of something. So for example, a soft skill that you may want to put in a job description is, good people skills, good phone manner, great customer service, things like that. Whereas a technical skill is something that, you can measure. So have you had experience with Excel? Have you ever used this type of equipment before? 5 years forklift experience, something like that, something that you actually can quantify. And I did mention it earlier, but I do think that it's important to include both, obviously, to kind of give an idea of what we want from the role, but those technical skills really should come before the soft skills. Great.
Okay, next question here. What's an example of internal terminology?
Okay, good one. I'm just trying to think of one that we use at HR Assured. I mean, okay, so we have a telephone advisory service, which we often refer to as TAS at work. But obviously, if you're putting something like TAS in a job description, nobody's going to know what you're talking about. So when you are doing job description, things like that, I'm sure there's a bunch of other ones. For example, when we're sending emails or we're sending messages, we might write ER instead of employer and EE instead of employee. So just make sure you're actually getting everything across, because people might not know what those little things mean.
Awesome. Okay. If you don't have an employee handbook, what are the essential policies that you need?
Good one, actually, really good one. So there's a difference between like an employee handbook and I guess a code of conduct. So the employee handbook is more so information for the employees to know this is what you're entitled to at work. These are your entitlements under law, blah, blah, blah. Whereas a code of conduct is something like, this is what we expect. If this isn't done, this is what the process will be. So one's essentially setting boundaries and one's telling employees what they're entitled to. In employee handbooks, it's really, really, really important to put in a workplace health and safety section, first and foremost. and even like an incident reporting section, who to go to, what to do if there is an incident at work. But you can also put in things there like a, bullying and harassment policy, uniform policy, even equal opportunity, parental leave. There's a bunch of stuff there. But I think workplace health and safety is one of the biggest ones to get onto ASAP.
Awesome. Someone's just asked, will they get access to the video recording? Yes, you will. We're going to send this after the webinar. If you do have any more questions though, please pop them in the Q&A. While we do wait for any more questions to come through, I will let you know that if you do have a workplace matter or HR issue that you are dealing with right now, and you'd like to try our award-winning telephone advisory service, we'd like to offer you a no obligation 30-minute expert advice call. And to arrange that, we'll send you a link after the webinar. So just look out for our email. No other questions just yet, so I'll just keep on rolling with this one, Catherine. So when you do see our email, we're also going to send you a best practice recruitment checklist. So look out for that, as well as that link to the free consultation call. Okay. So I don't think we have any more questions, Catherine. So I might just wrap things up. Hold on. We do. Can you please talk about candidates about responding to a call from, hold on a sec. Could you please talk about candidates about responding to calls from talent acquisition specialists? Do you kind of understand that one?
Not really, but I'll try and talk
info?
about it anyway. Yeah, I mean, I imagine what you're trying to say is candidates who have gone through maybe like a labour hire company, and then the labour hire company has come to you. I think it's something that's probably best suited to talk to the actual company about, because a lot of those specialists, they might say things like, we would really prefer if you're not actually getting in contact with the candidate yourself, and the actual communication is always between us. But that's not always the case. It could be different for different companies. So I think it's something great that you should ask the actual company themselves and say, hey, would you mind if I give the candidate a call without you there, have a conversation with them myself?
Great. Okay. That is all the questions. Oh, we have another one. This is good. Okay. What are your thoughts on staggered recruitment through reviewing CV, then a phone call, and then an official interview, as opposed to just an interview?
Look, I mean, I personally think it's fantastic. I think it's a really great way to do it that way. But what I would raise for consideration is, if you are having that CV and you're saying, oh, this is a good one, let's give them a call, you have the chat with them, and, maybe they just don't have it, rather than, hanging up the call and just letting it die. Potentially reach out in an email or something and say, hey, thank you so much for the call today. Really enjoyed speaking to you. Unfortunately, the position's been filled, but we'll keep you on file in future, blah, blah, blah. But I do think that staggered way is a really good way to go about it. Obviously, if you're happy to go from CV straight to interview, that's fine too. But I do know that staggered attempt is really popular lately. And to be honest, I like it.
Great. Okay. I'll just wait a few more seconds.
No worries at all.
I think that's it. Okay, well, thank you everyone for coming on to the webinar. And we will send the recording out with the email, and look out for future webinars that we will be doing. We normally do them each month. So we hope to see you at the next one. And thank you again, Catherine. Amazing job.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for attending, and thanks for hosting it.
No worries. Enjoy your day, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.
See ya.